There's another shelter under the North Ridge.
Then why isn't it on our plans?
There's an old shelter your plans missed.
Know your job. Let security do theirs. Tell me exactly what you know.
The shelter survived. The access corridor may have too.
The map ends here. Which way?
Drainage goes left. We take higher ground.
If this door won't open, we're trapped.
Not yet. This releases the pressure.
What happens if that intake stays closed?
Then finding this shelter wasn't enough.
There's no safe room here. The security chief's voice cut through Solara Ridge Resort, just as another blast of sand slammed against the 40-foot windows, turning the Arizona afternoon into a wall of moving brown. Crystal glasses trembled. A chandelier flickered overhead. Somewhere near the lobby, a woman called for her husband while guests crowded around dead phone screens, searching for signals that had vanished minutes earlier. Ethan Caldwell stood at the center of it all, his Navy suit dusted with sand, his blue eyes fixed on the emergency display flashing across the wall. East Evacuation Road. Impassable. Backup route. Offline. For a man who had built a billion-dollar empire by solving problems faster than everyone else, those words felt almost impossible. What about the underground safe room? Ethan demanded. The security chief shook his head. There isn't one, sir. Not on the current plans. Then a voice came from behind them. Calm. Female. Certain. There's another shelter. Heads turned. Maya Brooks stood beside an overturned serving cart, her bright red apron vivid beneath the emergency lights. At 25, she was one of dozens of employees most guests had barely noticed that day. Now every eye in the lobby found her. Ethan stared. He recognized the warm brown eyes, the natural curls pulled into a high ponytail. More importantly, he recognized the woman he had dismissed 6 hours earlier. What did you say? He asked. Maya stepped closer as the wind screamed around the building. There's an old emergency shelter north of the main structure. The security chief frowned. That area was sealed during construction. I know. Then how could there be a shelter? Maya's eyes moved toward Ethan. Because the resort was built over more than your plans show. Another warning tone sounded. The lobby lights died for half a second, then returned in a dim red glow. Ethan looked toward the windows. He could barely see 20 feet beyond the glass. Solara Ridge had been designed as a monument to modern engineering, a luxury desert retreat with reinforced windows, automated climate controls, satellite communications, and private roads connecting guests to civilization. Tonight, nearly every system Ethan had paid for was failing at once. Where's this shelter? He asked. Maya hesitated, not from fear, from memory. Her father's voice seemed to return from years ago, telling her about stone markers buried beneath shifting sand, about service tunnels forgotten when newer buildings rose above them, about a place constructed before anyone imagined champagne terraces and infinity pools in this desert. She had listened then. Nobody had listened to her today. It's under the North Service Ridge, she said, about 300 yards from this building. The security chief stared at the storm. We can't take people outside in that. Maya shook her head. We don't have to. There used to be an access corridor beneath the old maintenance wing. Ethan's expression changed. Used to be. Maya met his eyes. The building groaned under another wave of wind. Behind them, more than 60 guests and employees waited for someone to know what to do. 6 hours earlier, Ethan Caldwell had been the most powerful man at Solara Ridge. His company owned the land, the buildings, the roads, and nearly everything visible for miles. But the desert had reduced all that authority to one question. Who knew the way out? And suddenly, the answer was the young black waitress in the red apron. Ethan stepped toward her. Show us the corridor. Maya didn't move. There's something you need to know first. Ethan's jaw tightened. What? Her gaze shifted toward the dark northern wing. The entrance is under the part of the resort you ordered sealed. Before we continue, if you enjoy unforgettable stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary moments, subscribe to Hidden Tables. Every story reminds us that true character is revealed through courage, compassion, and the choices we make when no one is watching. Now, let's see what happens next. 6 hours earlier, the desert had looked harmless. Morning sunlight poured across Solara Ridge in sheets of gold, turning the distant mountains copper and making the resort shimmer like something placed there by imagination instead of construction crews. Luxury sport utility vehicles rolled beneath the entrance canopy. Investors stepped out wearing tailored suits and expensive sunglasses. Staff carried trays of sparkling water and champagne through a lobby cooled to 72 degrees, while outside the temperature had already climbed past 90. Everything about Solara Ridge whispered control. Maya Brooks knew better. She moved between tables with practiced ease, her white collared shirt crisp, her bright red apron tied neatly around her waist, her black name tag catching the sunlight whenever she passed the windows. Most guests never looked long enough to read it. They saw a tray approaching, reached for a glass, and returned to conversations about property values, expansion plans, and quarterly returns. Maya noticed things they did not. She noticed the wind shifting against the western windows. She noticed maintenance workers carrying old storage boxes from the north wing. She noticed a faded sheet of paper sticking from a recycling cart near the employee corridor. Something about its blue lines stopped her. "Hold on," she said. A maintenance worker named Luis Ramirez glanced back. "What is it?" Maya carefully pulled the sheet free. It was an old construction blueprint, yellowed at the edges and marked with handwritten notes. Much of it showed structures that no longer existed, but one symbol near the northern ridge made her chest tighten. S4, Emergency Shelter. Maya stared at it. She had seen that marking before, not on paper, but scratched into the cover of her father's old field notebook. Samuel Brooks had worked maintenance across this stretch of Arizona desert years before Solara Ridge existed. When Maya was a child, he used to tell her that the desert rewarded people who remembered what others ignored. Water lines, wind direction, stone markers, old service tunnels, places built for emergencies and forgotten when emergencies did not come. "You planning to redesign the resort?" Louise yoked. Maya smiled faintly. "No, I just recognize this." "From where?" She traced the line leading from the old maintenance wing toward the ridge. "My father used to work out here." Louise leaned closer. "That shelter is probably gone. Half this area was rebuilt." "Probably," Maya said, but she kept looking. One section of the blueprint had been torn away. The access route ended abruptly at the missing edge. She folded the surviving corner carefully and handed the rest back. "Can I keep this piece?" Louise checked. "It is headed for recycling." Maya slipped it into the pocket of her apron. Across the lobby, applause suddenly rose. Ethan Caldwell had arrived. Tall, composed, and perfectly at ease beneath a wall displaying the Caldwell Meridian Group logo. He moved through investors as though every conversation had been waiting for him. At 42, Ethan had built a reputation on seeing opportunity where other executives saw risk. Solara Ridge was supposed to prove that philosophy on the grandest scale yet. He stepped onto the presentation platform as the glass wall behind him framed miles of open desert. Maya continued serving, but she listened. "People told us this environment was too unpredictable," Ethan said. A few investors smiled. They said luxury could not thrive this far from the city. They said the desert would dictate the rules. He paused, letting the room settle around him. "We decided to write our own." Applause followed. Maya looked through the glass. Far beyond the terraces, a thin ribbon of dust moved along the horizon. Most people would have mistaken it for ordinary wind. Maya did not. She reached into her apron and touched the folded blueprint. Then she looked back at Ethan Caldwell, the man everyone in the room could see, while she remained the woman almost nobody noticed. The strange thing about being overlooked was that it gave you time to observe. And Maya had just noticed two things no one else had connected yet: an old shelter beneath the northern ridge and a desert beginning to change. "We did not come this far to let the desert tell us what we can build." Ethan Caldwell let the sentence settle over the room, and the investors answered with approving smiles. Behind him, sunlight burned across miles of Arizona sand. bright enough to make the horizon look polished. The view had been one of Solara Ridge Resort's greatest selling points. Floor-to-ceiling glass, private terraces, desert villas, positioned beneath open skies. Everything had been designed to make nature feel close without allowing it to feel powerful. Ethan believed that distinction mattered. He had spent more than 20 years turning difficult projects into profitable ones, and every success had strengthened the same conviction. Uncertainty was simply a problem waiting for someone disciplined enough to control it. This property represents what happens when engineering meets ambition, he continued. 3 years ago, this was empty ground. Today, it is one of the most advanced luxury resorts in the Southwest. More applause. Maya Brooks crossed quietly behind the last row of chairs with a tray balanced in one hand. She heard every word. Empty ground. The phrase stayed with her. Her father would have hated it. Samuel Brooks had never considered the desert empty. He had taught Maya that places carried histories whether developers remembered them or not. Old roads disappeared beneath new pavement. Utility tunnels vanished behind renovated walls. Stone markers survived long after maps stopped mentioning them. Maya touched the folded blueprint inside her apron pocket. The paper suddenly felt heavier. Outside, the thin ribbon of dust she had noticed earlier had widened. She stopped near the glass for half a second. The sky was still blue above the resort, but farther west, the color had begun to flatten into a pale, dirty gold. Maya. She turned. Her supervisor, Denise Parker, stood beside the service station. Table 12 needs sparkling water. Of course. Maya moved immediately, but her eyes returned to the horizon as she poured. A guest barely looked up. Thank you, sweetheart. Maya nodded professionally and continued. Across the room, Ethan stepped down from the platform and joined a group of investors beside a scale model of the resort. What about emergency access during severe weather? One man asked. Ethan gestured toward the model. 2 vehicle routes, satellite communications, backup generators, reinforced structural zones, and automated weather monitoring. We planned for redundancy. So you are telling us the desert cannot surprise you? The group laughed. Ethan smiled. I am telling you we made surprises expensive. Maya heard that too. She glanced toward a wall-mounted weather display near the concierge desk. Clear skies, moderate wind, no warning. Yet the palms outside were beginning to bend in a direction that did not match the display. Maya set down her empty tray and walked toward the employee hallway. She pulled the blueprint fragment from her pocket. S4 emergency shelter. A faded line ran south from the shelter before disappearing at the torn edge. She closed her eyes and remembered sitting beside her father at their kitchen table years ago while he sketched the old property from memory. If you ever get turned around out there, Samuel had told her, do not trust what looks newest. Trust what was built to last. Maya opened her eyes. The old maintenance wing stood almost exactly where that missing access line should have continued. She found Denise near the kitchen doors. Do we still have access beneath the north maintenance wing? Denise frowned. Why? I found an old site plan. There may be an emergency shelter under the ridge. Maya, facilities handles that. I know, but the wind is changing fast. Denise looked toward the windows, then back at Maya. The weather system says we are fine. Maya's voice remained calm. The desert does not read our weather system. Denise hesitated. That was enough. I will mention it to operations. Maya nodded, but something inside her refused to settle. Outside, the horizon had disappeared completely. The investors were still smiling. Ethan was still talking. And somewhere beneath nearly $1 billion of steel, glass, and confidence, an old shelter waited in the dark, forgotten by everyone except the waitress carrying its map in her pocket. I appreciate the concern, but we have engineers for this. Ethan Caldwell said it without raising his voice, which somehow made the dismissal sharper. Maya stood several feet from him near the scale model of Solara Ridge, the folded blueprint tucked inside her red apron, while Denise Parker waited beside her. Around them, investors continued their conversations beneath soft music and cold air, unaware that the western sky had darkened. Another shade. Denise had kept her word. She had mentioned Maya's concern to operations. Operations had passed it to the security director. The security director had brought it to Ethan because nobody wanted to interrupt an investor event over an old piece of paper without his approval. Now Maya had exactly 30 seconds of the billionaire's attention. The weather system is still showing moderate conditions, Ethan continued. Our emergency protocols were reviewed before opening. Maya kept her voice professional. Sir, I'm not questioning the current protocols. I'm saying there may be an older shelter beneath the North Ridge that is not included in them. Ethan glanced at the fragment she offered him. He did not take it. Where did you get that? It was being removed from storage. And you believe it is current? No, I believe it is old. That is why nobody is looking for what it shows. One of the engineers, standing nearby, leaned toward the paper. Maya pointed to the faded marking. S4. My father worked on this property before the resort was built. He told me about emergency structures out here, including a shelter connected to an underground service corridor. The engineer frowned. The north wing was redesigned twice during construction. Was everything underneath it removed? Maya asked. The question produced a brief silence. The engineer looked toward Ethan. I would have to check the archive plans. Maya nodded. Please do. Ethan's blue eyes returned to her name tag. Maya Brooks. For the first time that day, he appeared to register the name, but not yet the knowledge behind it. Ms. Brooks, we have an operations team, structural engineers, and professional security staff responsible for guest safety. I understand that you are trying to help. Maya heard the sentence for what it was. Polite, controlled, final. The wind has shifted, she said. The weather display has not caught up. Ethan glanced toward the windows. The sunlight outside had turned strangely muted, but the lobby remained calm. Weather changes in the desert. Yes, sir. Quickly. Denise shifted beside her. Ethan checked his luxury watch. An investor delegation was waiting. Across the room. Know your job, Miss Brooks. Let my safety team do theirs. He turned away. Maya did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply folded the blueprint again and returned it to her apron. There were moments when dignity meant speaking. There were others when dignity meant refusing to beg someone to hear what had already been said clearly. Maya walked back toward the service station. Behind her, Ethan resumed, discussing expansion plans as if the interruption had never happened. You tried, Denise whispered when Maya passed. Maya looked through the glass. The mountains that had been visible 20 minutes earlier were gone behind a thickening veil of dust. I was not trying to be right, she said. I was trying to make sure we had another option. Near the concierge desk, the weather display finally changed. Moderate wind disappeared. High wind advisory appeared in amber. A few guests noticed, but nobody moved. Then Maya saw Luis Ramirez crossing the lobby with a tablet in his hand, his expression different now. He hurried toward the operations office. Luis. Maya called. He stopped. You were right about one thing, he said quietly. I checked the demolition records. Maya felt her fingers tighten around the edge of her tray. And Luis lowered his voice. They sealed the old access corridor. Did they demolish the shelter? He shook his head. There is no record that they ever did. Maya looked toward Ethan. He was smiling for a photograph beneath the Caldwell Meridian logo. Outside, the first hard wave of dust swept across the terrace and erased the swimming pool from view. Then every phone in the lobby sounded at once. Every phone in the lobby screamed the same warning. Severe dust storm. Seek shelter immediately. The cheerful music stopped beneath the electronic alert, and for one strange second, nobody moved. Then 60 conversations collapsed into one rising wave of confusion. Guests turned toward the windows. Staff reached for radios. Investors who had been discussing expansion plans minutes earlier were suddenly calling drivers, pilots, assistants, anyone who might offer a way out. Outside, there was almost nothing left to see. The terrace had disappeared. The swimming pool was gone behind a moving curtain of brown. Even the nearest desert palms had become shadows bending beneath the wind. Ethan Caldwell lowered his phone and looked toward the operations director. Status. Visibility is dropping fast. The East Road is still open, but conditions are deteriorating. Get the guests into vehicles. Maya heard him from across the lobby. Do not do that. Several people turned. Ethan did too. Maya stood beside the service station, her tray forgotten on the counter. The East Road crosses open ground, she said. If visibility keeps falling, vehicles could lose the route. Ethan's expression tightened. Miss Brooks, security is handling this. Before Maya could answer, the operations director's radio crackled. A voice came through beneath heavy static. East route is closing. Sand is crossing the road faster than crews can clear it. The room changed. Not dramatically. Not yet. But Maya saw it in Ethan's face. The smallest fracture in certainty. Backup route? He asked. South Service Road. The director tapped his tablet. Nothing happened. He tried again. The gate control is offline. Ethan looked toward the ceiling as the lights flickered once. Twice. Then the main power vanished. Gas moved through the lobby. Emergency lighting came on seconds later, washing the marble floor in dim red. The resort that had looked invincible beneath Arizona sunlight now felt suddenly unfamiliar. Backup generator is active, someone called. Satellite communications? Ethan asked. Intermittent. Call the airfield. They already suspended operations. Ethan pulled out his phone and tried anyway. No signal. He stared at the screen as though money, influence, and force of habit might make the bars return. They did not. Maya watched him slip the phone back into his pocket. Less than an hour earlier, he had stood beneath the Caldwell Meridian logo explaining how Solara Ridge had been designed around redundancy. Now one system after another was becoming useless. Not because the engineers were incompetent, but because the desert did not care how much the resort had cost. Denise approached Maya. You really think that shelter exists? Louise found no demolition record. That is not the same as knowing it is there. No, Maya said, but it is more than we have right now. A deep vibration moved through the windows. Guests stepped backward. Security began directing everyone away from the glass and toward the interior conference hall. Ethan took control again, his voice steady. Everyone stays together. Staff, account for your sections. Security, keep the interior corridors clear. Nobody goes outside. Maya respected that. Panic needed structure, but structure needed somewhere safe to lead people. Louise hurried toward her. The North Wing access doors are sealed electronically. Can they be opened manually? Maybe from a maintenance side. Maybe. Denise repeated. Louise looked uncomfortable. That section has been closed since the renovation. Another warning appeared on the operations tablet. The director's face lost color. Sir, pressure readings along the western glass are climbing. Ethan looked toward the crowded conference hall, then toward the windows, then finally toward Maya. This time he did not look at her apron first. Tell me exactly what you know. Maya reached into her pocket and unfolded the old blueprint. I know the shelter was built beneath the North Ridge. I know an underground corridor once connected it to the maintenance wing. And I know your construction records say the corridor was sealed, but the shelter was never demolished. Ethan studied the faded lines. Can you get us there? Maya looked toward the dark hallway leading north. If the old route still exists. And if it does not, Maya met his eyes. Then we find out before this building makes the decision for us. At that moment, another alert flashed across the operation screen. East Evacuation Road, impassable. Ethan read it once. Then again. The billionaire who owned everything for miles around suddenly had nowhere left to go. Then we stop thinking like owners and start thinking like survivors. Maya's words landed quietly, but Ethan heard them. Around them, Solara Ridge continued shedding the illusion of control one system at a time. The satellite connection disappeared. Completely. The automated exterior doors locked themselves into emergency mode. The South Service gate stopped responding. On the operations screen, a digital map worth thousands of dollars showed routes nobody could safely use. Ethan stared at it, jaw tight. How long until conditions improve? He asked. The operations director checked the latest weather feed. We do not know. The signal is incomplete, but this could last for hours. And the conference hall? Interior and reinforced, but it was designed as an assembly space, not a long-term storm shelter. Ethan looked toward the guests. Some sat quietly now. Others whispered into useless phones. A little boy held his mother's hand while she tried to smile as if everything were normal. The sight changed something in Ethan's expression. These were no longer investors, clients, and staff categories on an emergency plan. There were people waiting for him to make the right decision. He turned to Luis Ramirez. Can you access the archive construction records locally? Some of them. The server room has backup power. Find everything on the north wing. Luis hurried away. Maya unfolded her blueprint fragment across the concierge desk. The paper looked almost absurd beside the resort's sleek tablets and polished marble. Old ink, faded measurements, handwritten notes. Yet it was the only map in the building pointing somewhere the storm had not already taken from them. Ethan leaned closer. Show me. Maya traced a line with her finger. This was the original maintenance corridor. It ran beneath the north wing for roughly 200 feet, then connected with an older passage toward the ridge. And the shelter? Farther north. My father said it was built into solid ground because workers needed somewhere protected during severe weather. How many people could it hold? I do not know. Ethan looked at her. That matters. So does reaching it. Before he could respond, Luis returned carrying a tablet and breathing quickly from the run. I found the renovation files. He placed the screen beside the blueprint. The corridor was sealed when the north wing became private event storage. Ethan studied the plan. Sealed. How? A partition wall here. Luis enlarged the image. But look at this. Behind the newer wall, the original corridor remained marked as existing structure. Not demolished. Not filled. Simply abandoned. Maya felt a familiar memory rise. Her father at the kitchen table, tapping an old pencil against a hand-drawn map. New walls do not erase old roads, Maya. They only make people forget where the roads were. What about the shelter? She asked. Luis searched again. Nothing. The security chief exhaled. So we are considering moving more than 60 people toward a shelter nobody can confirm exists. Maya turned toward him. We can confirm something else. She pointed toward the operation screen. Every route we plan to use is already gone. Silence. Ethan removed his luxury watch and placed it beside the blueprint while rolling back his shirt cuffs. The gesture was small, but Maya noticed it. For the first time since the storm began, he was no longer checking time, as though the schedule belonged to him. What do you need? He asked. Access to the north maintenance wing. Flashlights, water, dust masks, a manual toolkit, and people who will listen when I tell them to stop. The security chief almost objected, but Ethan raised a hand. Get it. Staff moved immediately. Maya folded the blueprint and returned it to her apron. Ethan watched her. You understand that if this route fails, we lose time. Yes. And you are still certain? Maya shook her head. No, the answer surprised him. Then why are you willing to try? Maya glanced toward the red emergency lights, the frightened guests, and the desert pressing against the windows. Because certainty is a luxury we do not have anymore. Before Ethan could answer, a sharp electronic tone came from the building system. A message appeared across the emergency display. Western lobby, structural safety margin declining. Ethan looked at the screen, then at Maya. Nearly $1 billion had built Solara Ridge. An old blueprint was about to decide whether it could save anyone. This is the corridor? Ethan asked. Luis Ramirez aimed his flashlight at a plain beige wall behind stacked banquet tables in the north. Maintenance wing. According to the renovation file, yes. Nothing about the room suggested rescue. Folding chairs, linen carts, boxes of unused glassware, a framed promotional photograph leaning against the wall. Behind all of it, somewhere was a passage that had disappeared from memory years before Maya ever carried her first tray through Solara Ridge. The security chief studied the tablet. There is no door. Because they covered it, Maya said. She walked closer and ran her eyes along the wall. Louise pointed toward a narrow vertical seam almost hidden beneath paint. Partition starts here. Ethan looked at the maintenance tools his staff had brought. Can we open it safely? Luis nodded. This wall is not structural. We can remove the access panel without disturbing the main supports. Ethan gave one short nod. Do it. While Luis and two maintenance workers began removing the panel, Maya studied the blueprint beneath her flashlight. Something bothered her. The old corridor did not run perfectly north. It curved slightly east before reaching the ridge. Why would they build it that way? The security chief asked. Maya looked up. Drainage. He frowned. In the desert? Especially in the desert. My father used to say people prepare for what they see every day and forget what happens once every 10 years. She pointed to a faint symbol near the corridor. That is an elevation marker. The passage follows higher ground beneath the slope. Ethan watched her carefully. Hours earlier, he had seen a waitress speaking outside her expertise. Now he saw someone reading the building like a language he had never learned. What else do you recognize? He asked. Maya traced another mark. Ventilation shaft here. Service junction here. And this symbol should mean a manual utility cutoff. The security chief glanced at Luis. Is she right? Luis checked the archived legend on his tablet. His eyebrows lifted. All three. Nobody spoke for a moment. Maya did not smile. Being proven right felt smaller than she had imagined because 60 people were still waiting behind them. A section of the wall came free, revealing darkness beyond it. Dust drifted through the flashlight. Beams. Luis leaned forward. There it is. The old corridor stretched beyond the opening, narrow but intact. Ethan stared into it. How far? Maya answered before Luis could. About 200 feet to the old junction. After that, the blueprint is incomplete. So we still do not know whether it reaches the shelter, the security chief said. No, Mayeri Plaith. But we know the corridor exists. A radio crackled at Ethan's side. The operations director's voice came through. Ethan, Western Lobby readings are getting worse. We need to relocate everyone now. Ethan looked back toward the route they had taken from the conference hall. Then he looked into the forgotten passage. For years, his company had measured value in square footage, occupancy rates, and revenue per room. Nobody had assigned value to this corridor because nobody believed they would need it. Maya stepped through the opening first. Wait, Ethan said. She turned. He held out a flashlight. Take the stronger one. Maya accepted it. A simple gesture. No speech. No apology. Not yet. But something had shifted. She swept the beam across the concrete floor and stopped. Beneath years of dust was a faded painted arrow. North. Beside it were two letters her father had once described to her. Emergency shelter. Maya's heartbeat quickened. This is the route. Ethan stepped beside her. You are sure? I'm sure this passage was built to reach it. That is not what I asked. Maya met his eyes. It is the most honest answer I can give you. Behind them, another warning tone sounded through the resort. Ethan looked into the darkness, then back toward the world he had built. Then you lead. Maya untied her bright red apron from her waist and wrapped it securely around her upper arm where it could be seen in the dim corridor. Everyone stays close, she said. Nobody passes me. Nobody falls behind. This time, nobody questioned the waitress. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories where the most overlooked people reveal the greatest strength, subscribe to Hidden Tables. Here, every story reminds us that courage, integrity, and kindness can come from the most unexpected places. Now, let's see what happened. Next, keep your eyes on the red apron and keep moving. Maya's voice traveled through the old corridor more clearly than the storm above them. One by one, guests and employees entered the passage, carrying flashlights, bottled water, emergency bags, and the uneasy silence of people who had finally understood that the building behind them could no longer guarantee their safety. Maya walked first. The bright red fabric around her upper arm became a small beacon in the darkness. Ethan followed several feet behind her, then Luis Ramirez, the security chief, Denise Parker, and the rest of the group. The corridor smelled of dry concrete and years of forgotten dust. Old pipes ran along the ceiling. Faded maintenance numbers appeared on the walls. Every 20 or 30 feet, Maya stopped long enough to compare the markings with the fragment of blueprint in her hand. Why are we slowing down? An investor called from farther back. Because getting there safely matters more than getting there quickly, Maya answered. Nobody argued. Ethan noticed that too. The same people who had barely acknowledged her while she carried champagne were now measuring every step by her instructions. Power had not announced its transfer. There had been no vote, no ceremony. It had simply moved toward the person who knew what to do. After roughly 200 feet, Maya raised her hand. Everyone stopped. The corridor divided into two passages. The blueprint fragment ended at that exact point. Luis moved beside her. Which way? Maya aimed her flashlight left, then right. Both tunnels disappeared into darkness. The security chief checked his tablet, but there was no signal and no useful map stored for this section. We cannot guess, he said. We are not going to, Maya replied. She crouched near the floor and studied the concrete. Ethan stepped closer. What are you looking for? Slow. She placed a small water bottle on its side. It rolled gently toward the left passage. Drainage runs that way. Ethan looked confused. You said the shelter followed higher ground. Exactly. Maya pointed right. So we go against the drainage. Luis swept his flashlight along the right wall. A faded stripe appeared beneath layers of dust. Yellow paint. Maya moved closer. Near the bottom was another nearly erased marking. S4. Denise let out a quiet breath. She found it. Maya shook her head. We found the route. The shelter is still ahead. They continued right. Minutes later, the corridor began climbing slightly. The air felt cooler. Then the passage ended at an old steel service door. No electronic lock. No keypad. Just a heavy manual wheel at its center. Luis tried turning it. Nothing. It is stuck. Ethan stepped forward. Can we open it? Maybe. The mechanism has not moved in years. Maya examined the frame. Her father had taught her something about old emergency doors, too. Do not fight the wheel first. Release the pressure holding it. She looked along the wall and found a small lever beneath a metal cover. Luis, what is this? He brushed away the dust. Manual pressure, equalizer. Ethan looked at Maya again. Another forgotten detail. Another answer she should not have possessed according to the assumptions he had made about her. Luis pulled the lever. Air whispered through the mechanism. He tried the wheel again. This time it moved. Slowly, then steadily. The door opened inward. Beyond it stretched another passage cut through older concrete, rougher than the resort foundations behind them. Maya stepped through and found a weathered sign bolted to the wall. Emergency shelter, 250 feet. A quiet sound of relief traveled through the group. Ethan looked at Maya. You were right. She met his eyes. We are not there yet. Then the lights behind them flickered and vanished. The corridor fell dark except for their flashlights. Ethan turned toward the people waiting for direction. His company logo was nowhere in sight. His title meant nothing to the tunnel. He looked back at Maya and said the words he would not have imagined saying that morning. What do you need us to do? Maya lifted her flashlight toward the passage ahead. Follow me. 250 feet, Maya said. Stay together, and we get there together. Her flashlight cut through the darkness as the group moved deeper beneath the ridge. Without the resort's emergency lights. Behind them, the tunnel felt older, quieter, almost separate from the billion-dollar property above. The storm remained present as a distant vibration through the concrete. But down here another sound had taken over. Footsteps. More than 60 people moving at the pace set by a 25-year-old waitress most of them had ignored that morning. Ethan stayed close behind Maya. His polished black shoes were coated with dust now. His navy suit no longer looked like a symbol of authority. In the narrow tunnel, everyone carried the same thing, uncertainty. Marker ahead, Maya said. She stopped beneath a faded number painted on the wall. 14. Her eyes narrowed. My father mentioned these. Luis moved closer. What do they mean? Distance markers from the old work site. If I remember correctly, they counted backward toward the shelter. Ethan aimed his flashlight farther down the tunnel. Another number appeared. 13. Then we were going the right way. Maya nodded. For now. They continued. At marker 9, the passage narrowed where sand had filtered through a seam near the ceiling. Maya slowed everyone and directed them along the clear side. At marker 6, they found an old ventilation grill. Maya placed her hand near it. Cool air moved faintly across her fingers. Airflow, she said. Luis smiled for the first time since the storm began. That is a very good sign. A woman near the back asked, How much farther? Maya turned so everyone could hear her. Less than 100 feet, if the markers are accurate. The answer moved through the group like warmth. Ethan watched Maya turn forward again. Earlier, he had mistaken her calmness for the limited confidence of an employee who did not understand the complexity of his resort. Now he understood something uncomfortable. She had never lacked confidence. She had simply learned not to waste it performing for people who had already decided what she knew. Marker 5. Marker 4. Marker 3. Then Maya's flashlight found a steel door set into the rock. Above it, barely visible beneath decades of dust, were the words Emergency Shelter S4. Nobody spoke. For a second, relief itself seemed too fragile to touch. Denise covered her mouth. Luis whispered, Samuel was right. Maya stared at the sign. She could almost hear her father laughing at the kitchen table, telling her that forgotten things were not useless things. They were simply waiting for someone to remember. Ethan stepped beside her. Your father saved this place before we ever built it. Maya shook her head gently. He remembered it. That is different. The security chief reached for the door wheel, but Maya stopped him. Check the lower seal first. He looked down. Sand had accumulated along one edge. Luis cleared it carefully, then examined the mechanism. Good catch. It can open. Together, Luis and the security chief turned the wheel. The door released with a deep metallic groan. Cool. Stale air moved outward. Flashlights swept across a wide concrete chamber containing old benches, storage cabinets, emergency water tanks, and another sealed doorway at the far end. The shelter existed. It was real. A wave of relieved voices filled the chamber as people entered. Some sat immediately. Others embraced family members. Ethan remained near the entrance while the last employees came through. Maya stepped inside after them. He looked at her red apron wrapped around her arm. You brought everyone here. We brought everyone here. No, Ethan said quietly. I need to learn when accuracy matters more than pride. You brought us here. Maya studied him for a moment, hearing something in his voice that had not been there 6 hours earlier. Humility. Then Luis called from across the shelter. Maya, Ethan, you need to see this. They crossed the room. Luis stood beside an old ventilation control panel. One indicator was moving weakly. Another did not move at all. His relief had disappeared. The main intake is barely functioning, he said. Ethan looked around at more than 60 people settling into the chamber. What does that mean? Luis stared at the secondary system diagram mounted beside the controls. It means finding the shelter was only the first problem. How much time do we have? Ethan asked. Luis Ramirez did not answer immediately. He studied the old ventilation panel, then followed a faded diagram. Mounted beside it, the shelter was designed for fewer people than we have in here, he said. The main intake is moving some air, but not enough for more than 60 people to remain comfortable for hours. Ethan looked across the chamber. Families sat along concrete benches. Employees distributed bottled water. A few guests had begun talking quietly again, relieved simply to have solid walls around them. They believed the danger had passed. Maya knew better from the expression on Luis's face. There is a secondary intake, she said, pointing to the diagram. A thin line ran from the shelter toward the northern slope. Luis nodded. Yes, but the control here is mechanical. The indicator says the exterior damper is closed. Can we open it from inside? Not from this panel. Ethan stepped closer. Where is the exterior control? Luis traced a line. About 80 feet north of us, probably above ground. The security chief shook his head. Nobody is going outside in that storm. Maya stared at the diagram. Something about the symbol beside the secondary shaft pulled at her memory. A circle, a short line, 3 small marks beneath it. Her father had drawn the same symbol once. She closed her eyes for a moment. Samuel's voice returned with the clarity of an old lesson. Emergency vents were built where drifting sand was least likely to bury them. Look for stone, not open ground. It might not be completely exposed, Maya said. Ethan turned toward her. What do you mean? If this was built the way my father described, the secondary intake would be protected by the ridge. There may be a service recess cut into the rock. Luis examined the old diagram again. She could be right. This marking may indicate a recessed access point. The security chief folded his arms. May. Maya looked at him. Everything useful today started with May. Silence followed. Ethan looked around the shelter again. Hours earlier, his instinct would have been to issue an order and expect everyone else to make it work. Now he asked a different question. Maya, what would you do? She noticed the wording. Not tell me what you know. Not prove it. What would you do? First, I would see weather. There is an interior maintenance connection to the shaft, she said. If there is, we might reach the control without going fully outside. Luis pointed toward the second sealed doorway at the far end of the chamber. That could be it. They crossed the shelter together. The old door opened into a narrow utility passage running uphill. Maya swept her flashlight across the walls. Pipes. Électrical conduit. Dust. Then another faded arrow. Ventilation service. There, she said. The passage continued for roughly 60 feet before ending beneath a metal hatch. Luis climbed the short service ladder and examined it. This opens into the ridge recess. The manual damper should be nearby. Wind hummed faintly beyond the hatch. Ethan looked up. Can you reach it? Luis shook his head. Not safely alone. I need someone below reading the old control sequence while I adjust it. Maya unfolded the blueprint fragment, but the ventilation sequence was not there. Then she noticed a small instruction plate beside the ladder. Most of the lettering had faded, yet 3 steps remained readable. Release pressure. Open bypass. Turn intake counterclockwise. I can read it from here, she said. Ethan stepped beside the ladder. Then tell me what to do. Maya looked at him. Luis needs someone at the mechanism. You understand the sequence. I can follow instructions. For the first time that day, Ethan Caldwell did not sound like a man surrendering authority. He sounded like a man finally understanding what authority was for. Luis climbed toward the hatch. Ethan followed behind him. Maya stood below with a flashlight and read each instruction slowly. A minute later, metal shifted somewhere beyond the wall. The dead indicator inside the passage trembled. Then it moved. Cool air flowed through the vent. Maya smiled, but Luis looked down from the ladder with concern. The damper opened only halfway. Ethan's voice came from above. What? Luis examined the mechanism. Sand is packed around the exterior housing. Maya looked at the final line on the faded instruction plate. Manual clearing required. The shelter had given the protection. Now the desert was asking what they were willing to do to keep it. Nobody goes out there alone. Ethan's voice carried up the narrow utility passage as Luis Ramirez studied the half-open damper. Wind pressed against the exterior hatch with a low, steady howl. Maya stood below the ladder, flashlight aimed at the faded instruction plate. The housing is recessed into the ridge, she said. If my father was right, whoever clears it should have some protection from the direct wind. The security chief shook his head. Should have is not enough. Ethan looked down from the ladder. Then we do this carefully. No heroics. No unnecessary risks. Maya almost smiled at the irony. 6 hours earlier, Ethan had spoken about mastering the desert. Now he was learning to negotiate with it. Luis climbed down and pointed at a rough maintenance sketch beside the hatch. The intake housing sits about 12 feet from the access point. There is a recessed service channel between them. Maya studied the drawing. A memory returned. Her father explaining why older desert crews built service paths against rock instead of across open sand. The channel should run along the east face, she said. That puts the ridge between us and the strongest western wind. Ethan looked at her. Us. I know what we are looking for. You have already done enough. Maya held his gaze. More than 60 people are breathing through that system. Enough is not the question. Ethan had no answer to that. The security chief prepared safety lines, protective goggles, dust masks, and heavy outer jackets from the emergency supplies. Every movement was deliberate. Nobody rushed. Nobody pretended the storm was harmless. When the hatch opened, wind pushed dust into the recess, but the rock wall blocked the worst of it. Visibility inside the service channel was limited, yet the intake housing remained reachable. Maya went first only far enough to identify the stone markers. Ethan followed on the secured line. with Luis staying near the hatch to guide them back. Maya swept her flashlight low across the rock. One marker, then another. There, she called. The intake housing sat beneath a shallow stone overhang, its lower vents buried beneath packed sand. Ethan crouched beside it. Tell me what needs clearing. Maya pointed to the base. Only enough to free the damper. Do not uncover the whole housing. The ridge is protecting it. Ethan began moving sand away with a maintenance scoop. Maya worked beside him. No assistants. No board members. No cameras. Just two people clearing an old ventilation system while dozens waited beneath them. After several minutes, Maya saw a narrow metal edge appear. Stop! Ethan immediately stopped. She checked the mechanism. That is the damper arm. Clear around the hinge, not beneath the intake. He followed her instructions exactly. The difference was impossible to miss. Earlier, he had told her to know her job. Now he trusted her enough to let her define his. Try it, Maya said into the radio. Luis adjusted the control from inside. The damper moved farther. A deeper mechanical hum came through the housing. Again, another turn. The vent opened fully. Luis's voice burst through the radio. Full airflow. We have full airflow. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. Relief, not triumph. Maya looked toward the storm beyond the protected recess. We should get back inside. Ethan nodded, but before they moved, he said, Maya. She turned. Dust covered his suit. His carefully styled hair had lost its perfect shape. For once, he looked less like the face of Caldwell Meridian Group and more like a man who understood how close confidence could come to becoming blindness. I was wrong about you. Maya's expression remained calm. You were wrong about what my uniform meant. The words stayed between them. Ethan nodded slowly. That too. They returned through the service channel and sealed the hatch behind them. When Maya stepped back into the shelter, cool air was flowing steadily through the vents. People looked up. A little boy near the benches took a deep breath and smiled at his mother. Denise squeezed Maya's hand as she passed. Ethan entered behind her, but nobody applauded him. He did not seem to want them to. He walked directly to the ventilation panel, checked the steady indicator, then looked across the room at the people Maya had helped lead to safety. For most of his life, Ethan had believed leadership meant being the person everyone followed. That night, beneath the desert, he learned another version. Sometimes leadership meant recognizing who knew the way, stepping behind them, and listening. The wind is dropping. Luis Ramirez said it so softly that the first few people did not hear him. Then the words traveled across the shelter, from bench to bench, until more than 60 tired faces turned toward the ventilation panel. The intake indicator remained steady. The low mechanical hum that had frightened them hours earlier now sounded almost comforting. Ethan checked the time on a wall clock because his luxury watch was still somewhere near the concierge desk, forgotten beside an old blueprint. It was shortly after sunrise. They had spent the night beneath the ridge. Maya sat beside Denise Parker, her red apron back around her waist, holding a paper cup of water between both hands. She had barely slept. Every hour she had checked the ventilation system with Luis, listened for changes in the storm, and helped reassure guests who woke frightened by unfamiliar sounds. Nobody had asked her to do it. That was precisely why Ethan noticed. We have contact, the security chief announced. A portable emergency radio crackled with a distant voice. County responders had reached the southern edge of the property. The storm had weakened enough for rescue teams to approach, although several roads remained covered by drifting sand. Relief spread through the chamber without celebration. People were too exhausted for that. Ethan walked toward Maya. They found us. She looked up. Good. They're coming through the maintenance route. Maya nodded, then glanced around the shelter. Make sure families and older guests go first. Ethan almost said that security already had an evacuation order. Instead, he simply replied, agreed. 2 hours later, daylight returned to their world. The resort looked transformed. Sand-covered terraces, pressed against doors, and softened the clean geometric lines of the property. The sky above Arizona was blue again, almost offensively peaceful. Emergency vehicles waited near the service entrance while responders checked each guest and employee. Then came the cameras. News crews had gathered beyond the secured perimeter after learning that dozens of people had sheltered beneath the resort overnight. Ethan had spent years speaking to cameras. He knew where to stand, how long to pause, how to turn complicated events into clear sentences. A reporter raised a microphone. "Mr. Caldwell, can you tell us how you successfully led the evacuation when the resort systems failed?" Ethan looked toward the camera. For 1 second, the old instinct returned. Protect the company. Control the message. Reassure investors. Leadership had always meant standing at the microphone when things went right and accepting responsibility when they did not. But responsibility and credit were not the same thing. Ethan looked past the reporters. Maya stood near a service vehicle helping Denise distribute water. No one had placed her in front of camera. No one had asked who had carried the forgotten map. Ethan turned back to the reporter. "I did not lead the evacuation." The reporter hesitated. "Then who did?" Ethan stepped away from a microphone and pointed across the courtyard. "Maya Brooks." Heads turned. Maya froze when she heard her name. Ethan continued. "She warned us before conditions became critical. I dismissed her concern. When our planned routes failed, she identified an old emergency shelter that was missing from our current operational maps. She found the access corridor. She guided more than 60 people there. And when the ventilation system failed to operate properly, she helped restore it." Another reporter asked, "How did a waitress know more about the property than the resort's management?" Ethan looked directly at him. "That is the wrong question." Silence gathered. The right question is why management assumed her job title determined the value of what she knew. Maya stared at Ethan from across the courtyard. He did not smile for the cameras. He did not turn the moment into a performance. "Yesterday morning," he continued, "I told Ms. Brooks to know her job. Last night, every person in that shelter was fortunate that she knew far more than the job we had chosen to see." The cameras shifted toward Maya. Ethan stepped completely away from the microphone. "If you want to know how he got out," he said, "ask the woman who actually knew the way." For the first time since Solara Ridge opened, the Billionaire stood outside the frame while the Waitress walked into it. 3 months later, the desert looked almost exactly as it had before the storm. That was the strange thing about places that survived disaster. The sky returned to blue. The mountains returned to the horizon. Wind moved gently through the palms at Solara Ridge, and new guests arrived beneath the same entrance canopy where fear had once replaced champagne and conversation. But the resort itself had changed, not simply because damaged systems had been repaired. Ethan Caldwell had ordered a complete review of every emergency procedure across Caldwell Meridian Group. Old construction records were digitized. Forgotten service corridors were inspected. Local workers were invited into safety meetings that previously belonged only to executives, engineers, and consultants. The shelter beneath the northern ridge was restored, expanded, supplied, and permanently added to the resort's emergency plans. Above its entrance hung a simple plaque honoring Samuel Brooks and the workers who had maintained the property long before Solara Ridge existed. Maya had cried when she first saw her father's name, quietly, privately. Then she had touched the plaque and smiled. Ethan offered her something too, but it was not a check, a luxury car, or some extravagant reward designed to make a billionaire look generous. He offered her a position on the company's new Frontline Safety Council, with paid training in emergency management and a path toward a permanent operations role if she wanted it. Maya accepted the training. She did not immediately leave the restaurant. That surprised Ethan. "You know you do not have to keep waiting tables," he told her one morning. Maya adjusted her black name tag against her white shirt. "I know. Then why stay?" She smiled. "Because changing my job overnight would make everyone think the uniform was the problem." Ethan understood. And it was not. No, the problem was what people assumed when they saw it. That lesson followed him into boardrooms. He began asking employees closest to a problem what they knew before asking executives what they believed. It slowed some meetings down. It improved more decisions than he expected. On a clear October morning, Maya stepped onto the terrace carrying 2 glasses of iced tea for a table near the windows. Her bright red apron moved lightly in the breeze. Ethan was crossing the lobby with Luis Ramirez when he saw her. Months earlier, he might have passed without looking. This time he stopped. "Morning, Maya." She turned. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell." Ethan smiled. "Ethan." Maya considered him for a second. "You are still my employer." "Fair point." Luis laughed. Maya continued toward her table, but Ethan glanced through the glass toward the northern ridge. Somewhere beneath that quiet stretch of stone sat the shelter his company had forgotten, and a lesson he knew he never would. He had spent nearly $1 billion building Solara Ridge. He had believed ownership meant understanding. He had believed expertise arrived with titles, credentials, and expensive offices. Then one terrible night stripped away every convenient assumption. Technology failed. Roads disappeared. Phones went silent. And the person everyone followed was the woman many had barely noticed when she was carrying a tray. Maya had not needed to become powerful that night. She had already possessed what mattered: knowledge, composure, memory, courage, and a willingness to use them for people who had not always respected her. Ethan's transformation mattered for the same reason. Redemption was not an apology spoken once beneath television lights. It was what happened afterward, when nobody was recording. It was changing the system that had ignored her. It was remembering her name. It was listening sooner than next time someone without status knew something important. The desert had not cared who owned the resort. The storm had not recognized wealth, job titles, tailored suits, or red aprons. It had reduced everyone to something simpler: human beings depending on one another. And perhaps that was why the old shelter had taught them more than the new resort ever could. Money could build walls. Authority could command a room. But neither could replace the wisdom to listen, the humility to follow, or the character to lead when others needed a way forward. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Hidden Table and join a community that believes true character is revealed not by power or status, but by courage, integrity, and kindness. Thank you for watching, and until next time, we'll save you a seat at the Hidden Tables.